31 years old, and according to my family, I am the cautionary tale they tell at dinner parties. My name is Nadia Holloway, the one who walked away from Johns Hopkins Medical School after her first year, the one who threw away everything, the one whose mother still introduces her to new people with a small apologetic pause before she says the word daughter. My father is a cardiologist. My older brother is a cardiologist. My mother ran the volunteer board at Georgetown University Hospital for 15 years. Medicine wasn't just our family's profession, it was our religion, and I had committed the unforgivable sin of apostasy. What none of them knew, what I had spent 4 years carefully, exhaustively making sure they would never know, was that I hadn't failed out. I hadn't broken down. I had been approached by a woman named Dr. Dal Aldrich, a quiet, precise epidemiologist who worked not just for the CDC but for a small, classified unit within it called the Sentinel Division. She had read my thesis on pathogen surveillance patterns in dense urban populations. She said it was the most sophisticated analysis she had seen from any student, graduate or undergraduate, in 11 years. She offered me something Johns Hopkins never could. I said yes on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had submitted my withdrawal forms. By the following Monday, I had moved into a studio apartment in Atlanta, and my family had already begun the process of grieving me. The night I am thinking of began on a Friday in October. My brother was being honored at a gala hosted by the American College of Cardiology, a regional leadership award, the kind with a heavy crystal plaque and a room full of people in black tie who all know each other's salaries. My mother had called me 3 times to confirm I was coming. She wanted the family to look whole. That was the word she used. Whole. I drove up from Atlanta that afternoon, 2.5 hours on I-85 with my hands at 10 and 2, and a very specific kind of dread settling into my chest. I wore a navy dress I had owned for 4 years because I didn't own many dresses. I had spent the last 4 years wearing field clothes and biosafety equipment, and the occasional blazer for briefings in rooms I was not allowed to name. The gala was held at a hotel ballroom in Bethesda, the kind with chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. I found my family immediately. My mother spotted me from across the room and made her way over with the expression she always wore when she saw me in public, a practiced smile calibrated to project warmth without inviting questions. "You look tired," she said instead of hello. My father was already talking to 3 other physicians across the room. He glanced up when I arrived, gave me a single nod, and turned back to his conversation. That nod had been his primary form of acknowledgement for 4 years. My brother found me near the appetizer table 20 minutes later. He had already had 2 glasses of champagne and was in a generous mood, which for him meant he was willing to ask surface-level questions about my life without actually listening to the answers. "Still at the health department?" he asked, reaching past me for a stuffed mushroom. "Something like that," I said. His wife appeared at his elbow, perfectly assembled, warm in the way that people are warm when they are also silently keeping score. "We saw that the NIH was hiring," she said pleasantly. "I thought of you. You could probably get an entry-level position, even without finishing your degree. It's never too late to get back on track." I smiled. I had a lot of practice smiling. The dinner was seated, and I found my place card at the family table between my aunt and my mother. My aunt was my mother's older sister, a retired OB/GYN who treated every conversation like a clinical consultation. She leaned toward me before the salad course even arrived. "Your mother tells me you're doing some kind of public health work," she said, the phrase public health work delivered with the tone someone might use for recreational macrame. "I work for a federal health agency," I said. "Data entry? Communications? Something like that." She patted my hand. "Well, it's good to have a paycheck. Not everyone is cut out for the pressure of real medicine. There's no shame in knowing your limits." She said it gently, which somehow made it worse. Then she turned to my mother and began discussing my cousin's residency match. "Have you ever been in a room full of people who love you in theory but cannot see you at all? If you know what that feels like, that specific loneliness of being surrounded and still completely alone, stay with me. Because that night was the last night I sat quietly at that table. Everything was about to change. The award presentation began after the entree. My brother walked to the podium to a round of genuine applause. He was good at his job. I want to be clear about that. He was a genuinely skilled cardiologist, and the people in that room who admired him were not wrong. What they didn't know was the full picture of the family they were celebrating. He thanked our father first, then our mother. He described growing up in a household defined by service and excellence, and the belief that medicine was a calling. He paused there, a small loaded pause, and did not look at me. The omission was its own kind of statement. A room full of people who didn't know I existed received confirmation of that fact. I pressed my fork into the tablecloth and breathed slowly. Afterward, in the cocktail hour that followed, my father finally made his way to me. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and the other in his jacket pocket, and he stood beside me looking out at the room rather than at me. "Your brother worked hard for this," he said. "I know," I said. "He deserved it." A pause. "It's not too late, you know, if you wanted to reapply. I still know people at Hopkins. I could make a call." I looked at him. He was genuinely trying, in his way. That was the hardest part, understanding that this was him trying. "I'm okay, Dad," I said. He nodded. Not the dismissive nod from earlier. Something quieter. But he didn't ask anything else, and after a moment he drifted back toward his colleagues, and I was alone again at the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, invisible by default. I drove back to Atlanta that night instead of staying over. I told my mother I had an early call. She didn't push back. I think some part of her was relieved not to have to explain me at breakfast. What I didn't tell her was that the early call was real. At 6:47 the following morning, my encrypted work phone buzzed with a priority alert from our division director, a woman named Dr. Winslow, whose voice I had learned to read the way sailors read weather. There had been a cluster, 3 deaths in Maricopa County, Arizona, all with the same unusual hemorrhagic presentation. No obvious epidemiological link, no pathogen yet identified. The kind of thing that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up if you knew what you were looking at. Most people didn't. That was why the Sentinel Division existed. I was on a flight to Phoenix by noon. I need to tell you something about the work before I tell you what happened next. Because it's easy to make this sound glamorous. The encrypted phone, the classified briefings, the federal response infrastructure. But it wasn't glamorous. It was 16-hour days in portable field labs that smelled like disinfectant and anxiety. It was eating vending machine sandwiches at 2 a.m. while reviewing case files. It was calling families who had lost someone and asking them questions that felt brutal because they were, because understanding what happened was the only way to prevent it happening to someone else. I was good at it. Not just technically, I was good at the human part. At sitting with grief and fear and uncertainty and still asking the next question. Dr. Aldrich had seen that in my thesis, the way I wrote about populations not as data points but as people. She had said it was rare. I had never been told my way of seeing things was rare. I had only ever been told it was insufficient. The Maricopa investigation took 11 days. We identified the source, a contaminated water supply at a private commercial facility with falsified safety inspection records going back 3 years. The company responsible had paid a contractor to suppress 2 previous internal reports flagging the contamination risk. People had died because someone had decided the paperwork was too expensive to fix. That contractor worked for a firm called Barton Hale Environmental Services, and Barton Hale's largest regional client. I discovered on day 9 of the investigation while cross-referencing financial disclosures was a hospital network majority owned by a private equity group that included, among its founding partners, my uncle, my mother's brother, a man who had been at my brother's gala 3 weeks earlier, who had hugged me and asked if I was keeping busy. I sat with that information for 6 hours before I filed it. The weeks that followed were the kind that hollowed you out in ways you didn't fully feel until later. The investigation expanded. Federal attorneys got involved. The contractor cooperation agreements pulled threads that led to a much larger pattern of falsified environmental compliance across 4 states. Barton Hale became a case study. My uncle's investment group was named in civil litigation. It was not criminal. He had not known. The evidence suggested, and I believe that. But the financial exposure was significant, and his name was in documents that became public record. My mother called me on a Sunday morning in January. I was in my Atlanta apartment making coffee, still in the clothes I had slept in. I knew from the first syllable that the call was not casual. "Your uncle is very upset," she said. "I understand," I said. "He feels that that there was a way to handle this more quietly, that you could have reached out to the family before it went to attorneys." I set my coffee down. "Mom, people died. I know that, Nadia." A pause. "But family is people died," I said again. Quietly, not to cut her off, but because I needed her to hear it. 3 people died because someone decided the cost of fixing a problem was less important than the problem itself. I don't have a version of my job where I look the other way from that. The silence on the line was long. "Your father thinks," she started, then stopped, then started again. "We all think that maybe you went into this kind of work because that it was a way of punishing us for not supporting you when you left school." I held the phone and stared at the window. Outside, a January sky, white and flat and enormous. "I went into this work," I said carefully, "because someone saw that I was good at it, that's all." She cried a little. Not dramatically. My mother didn't do drama. A few controlled breaths. "I just don't understand why it always has to be you," she said. "Why you always end up in the middle of these things." I didn't have an answer that would help her, so I said I loved her and I hung up. That phone call was a before and after for me, something I had been carrying for years, some small persistent hope that they would eventually understand, eventually recalibrate. Went quiet, not with anger, just with a flat, clear recognition that the version of me they needed me to be and the person I actually was were never going to occupy the same space. I went back to work. The following spring, Dr. Aldrich retired. There was a small private ceremony at our field office. No press, no citations, just the people who had worked alongside her for years. She was 71 years old and had spent 40 of those years doing the kind of work that kept cities from burning down in ways the cities never knew about. She gave a short speech. She talked about the difference between visible work and necessary work. She said the most important thing she had ever learned was that service didn't require an audience. She looked at me when she said it. 2 weeks later, I received a formal communication from the Sentinel Division's Oversight Board. Effective immediately, I was being promoted to Deputy Director of Field Operations, the youngest person ever appointed to the role. Dr. Winslow called to tell me personally. She said Dr. Aldrich had written a letter. She didn't tell me what was in it, but her voice, when she said it, told me everything I needed to know. I sat in my car in the parking garage under our building and cried for about 4 minutes. Then I drove home and made pasta and did not tell anyone. My brother's wedding was in May, not a new relationship. He and his wife had been together for 6 years, but they had finally set a date. It was a large wedding, the kind that required a venue deposit 18 months in advance and a seating chart that was essentially a geopolitical document. My mother had been planning it with the focus of a military campaign. I was a guest, not in the wedding party, that had been settled without discussion, without anyone saying anything explicit, simply by my brother asking his med school friends to stand beside him and no one noticing the question had never been posed to me. The ceremony was at a vineyard in the Virginia countryside, an hour west of D.C. Late May, so the air still had that particular softness before the heat arrives. It was genuinely beautiful. I sat in the 3rd row and watched my brother marry a woman he loved, and I was glad for him. I want to be clear about that. The things that had happened between us didn't change the fact that watching him be happy made me feel something real. The reception was in a tent on the vineyard grounds, long tables draped in white linen, candles in glass hurricanes, a string quartet that transitioned to a DJ after the toasts. I was seated with extended family, distant cousins and my parents' friends, the table that functioned as the room's geographic margin. My uncle was there. We had not spoken since January. He found me near the bar during cocktail hour and stood beside me without quite looking at me the same way my father sometimes did, and said, "I hope you know I don't hold it against you. Professionally." I looked at him. "Okay," I said. "It was a difficult situation," he said. "I understand you had a job to do." "Yes," I said. He nodded, satisfied that we had reached some kind of resolution, and moved away. My mother appeared at my elbow a moment later. "That was gracious of him," she said quietly. I didn't respond. Dinner was seated and the toasts began. My father gave a toast, he cried, which surprised me. He was not a man who cried in public, and said things about my brother that were true and earned. My mother gave a toast that was elegant and funny and made the room laugh in the right places. My brother's best man gave a toast that ran 4 minutes too long and still landed well because he clearly loved my brother. No one asked me to speak. I had not expected them to, but sitting there, listening, I became aware of something I had not fully named before. It wasn't resentment, exactly. It was more like clarity, the kind that comes slowly, the way your eyes adjust to a dark room, until suddenly you can see the full shape of everything that has been there all along. The wedding ended the way weddings end, in waves of departure and long hugs, and the particular chaos of people trying to locate their coats. I was near the exit, waiting for the valet to bring my car, when I heard my name. I turned. Standing 10 feet away, in a navy suit with the easy posture of someone who did not need to perform authority because she simply had it, was Dr. Winslow, my director. She had been a guest. I had seen her name on the program as a family friend. Her husband was a college friend of my father's, which was a fact I had carefully not thought about for 4 years. Beside her stood a man I recognized but had not expected to see, Dr. Hargrove, the director of the CDC. Not the Sentinel Division, the CDC, a man who had been appointed by 2 administrations, who had sat in front of congressional subcommittees, who had made decisions during the previous decade that had, quietly, saved an unknowable number of lives. He was looking at me with an expression of open recognition, not surprise, like he had been waiting for this specific moment. "Nadia," Dr. Winslow said, "I've been wanting to introduce you." She said it calmly, conversationally. "Dr. Hargrove, this is our new Deputy Director of Field Operations." She led the Maricopa investigation. Something shifted in the air. Dr. Hargrove extended his hand. "I know the Maricopa work," he said. "I read the full report. Twice." He paused. "That was exceptional analysis under significant pressure. The kind of judgment that's genuinely difficult to train." He looked at me steadily. "You should know that work is being used as a case study in our emergency response training program." I shook his hand and managed to say something that I hope sounded professionally composed, because inside I was very far from it. My father had appeared at the edge of the conversation. I don't know how long he had been there. His face was unreadable in the way it got when he was trying to process something that didn't fit his existing map of the world. Dr. Hargrove turned, noticed him, and extended the same easy handshake. "Dr. Holloway, your daughter has done remarkable work for this country, work that doesn't get the recognition it deserves, because the whole point of it is that no one sees it. But I want you to know," he said it simply, without theater, the way people say things they mean. "She's genuinely exceptional at what she does." The silence was very specific. My father looked at me, then at Dr. Hargrove, then at Dr. Winslow. He opened his mouth and closed it again. My mother was there now too. I don't know when she had arrived. Her expression was one I had never seen before, not the practiced smile, not the polished composure. Something quieter and more uncertain. My aunt. the one from the gala in October, the one who had asked about data entry, was standing just behind my mother's left shoulder. She had a glass of wine that she was no longer drinking. She was staring at me the way people stare when they realize they have been confidently wrong about something for a very long time. Dr. Hargrove excused himself a few minutes later, pressing his card into my hand and saying he hoped to speak more at the next all hands in September. Dr. Winslow gave me a look as she followed him, a small, precise, knowing look, and then they were gone. I was left standing with my family in the cooling May air, the tent lights warm behind us, the sound of the DJ starting a slow song drifting out through the fabric walls. My father spoke first. His voice was different, not warm exactly. My father was not a warm man, but something in it had shifted, some structural tension I had stopped noticing because it had always been there. "Why didn't you tell us?" he said. The question was genuine. That surprised me. I thought about it for a moment. "Because the work required that I not tell you," I said. "That's the nature of it. But all this time," he stopped. Started again. "We thought." "I know what you thought," I said. My mother's hand moved toward mine, stopped, then completed the gesture. She took my hand briefly and squeezed it once. Her eyes were bright. My brother had appeared at the edge of our small circle. He had no idea what had just happened, could see only that something had. He looked at me the way he hadn't looked at me in years, just looked, like I was a person he was actually seeing. "Who was that?" he asked. "The director of the CDC," my father said. He said it carefully, like he was still getting used to the sound of it. My brother looked at me for a long moment. "Nadia," he said slowly, "what do you actually do?" I smiled at him. "A real one, the first real one of the night. I keep things from getting catastrophically bad," I said. "Usually before anyone knows there was a risk." He stared at me. "Since when?" "Since I was 27. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was adjusting, like a room after someone opens a window. I didn't stay long after that. The valet brought my car, and I drove out through the vineyard roads with the windows down, the night air smelling like grass and new leaves, the stars visible because we were far enough from the city. I felt the specific lightness of a weight you have carried so long you stopped counting it. But I want to be honest about what I felt in that car, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering here. It wasn't triumph. It was more complicated than that. There was relief, yes, and something that might have been vindication. But underneath that was something quieter and harder to name. A grief, I think, for all the years the question had sat unanswered. For all the Sunday dinners where I had taken up as little space as possible. For every apology in my mother's silences and every distance in my father's nods. None of that dissolved just because Dr. Hargrove had shaken my hand. What it did was give me permission to stop waiting, to stop hoping that some external confirmation would be the thing that made them finally see me. I had been waiting for 4 years for a moment that might make them understand. And now that it had come, I realized I had stopped needing it somewhere along the way without noticing. 3 days after the wedding, I drove back to Atlanta. I had a briefing Monday morning and a field review in Portland the following week, and 147 unread emails that were all, in their various ways, urgent. I stopped at a diner off I-85, the same one I had been stopping at since I first moved to Atlanta. It was open 24 hours and smelled like coffee and griddle grease, and the booths had cracked vinyl seats that had never been replaced because no one who ate there cared. I ordered black coffee and blueberry pancakes from a server named Glow, short for Gloria, who had been working the Sunday morning shift for as long as I had been coming there. She never asked what I did or why I looked tired. She just kept my cup full and called me honey in the way that felt earned rather than performative. "You look like you just came from somewhere fancy," she said, because I was still wearing the dress from the rehearsal dinner. "My brother's wedding," I said. "Nice?" "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah." It was nice. She refilled my coffee without being asked and moved on to the next table. I sat with the pancakes and the coffee and the specific piece of a place that made no demands on who you were supposed to be, and I thought about what came next, not in a grand sense. Just what to do with the space that opens up when you stop carrying something heavy. I had a job I was good at, I had colleagues who respected me, I had Dr. Aldrich's letter, which I had finally allowed myself to read the night before, which said, in her precise, unadorned way, that I had the clearest ethical instincts of any one she had trained in 40 years, and that the work I would do in the years ahead would matter in ways I might never see. And that was the whole point, and I should never lose sight of that. My phone buzzed, a message from my brother. No preamble, no framing, just, I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry I didn't. Congratulations on the job. I read it twice. I didn't know yet what it would mean for us going forward. Whether we would rebuild something, or whether the distance had become its own kind of geography that we would simply learn to navigate differently. I didn't need to know yet. Some things work themselves out slowly in small increments if you give them room. I put the phone down and looked out the window at the highway, Georgia morning, pale gold light coming in sideways, trucks heading north and south, the whole ordinary machinery of the world turning over. I thought about Dr. Aldrich and the 40 years she had worked in rooms no one would ever know the names of, and the quiet, absolute certainty she carried about why it mattered. I thought about the water in Maracapa and the 3 families who were still learning how to move through days that had been permanently altered, and how the only adequate response to that was to make sure it happened to fewer people next time. I thought about my father's face in the vineyard lights, that specific, undisguised confusion of a man recalibrating something he thought he already understood. I left a 20 on the table, told Glow her coffee was the best in the state, and walked back out into the morning. The work was waiting. It always was, and for the first time in a long time, walking toward it felt not like an escape from something, but like an arrival.